Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really intricate, highly philosophical framework of existence, and it all comes from a text known as the Eternal Law. We're going to impartially unpack its esoteric cosmology, specifically focusing on its fascinating depiction of spiritual ascent and how it maps out the layered dimensions of the afterlife. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Right off the bat, the text we're examining today begs a pretty profound question. What actually happens when a soul finally sheds its earthly desires? Well, according to this specific framework, that shedding isn't the end of the line. It's actually just the beginning of a remarkable upward journey, a true narrative arc of the soul ascending into much higher, more refined states of awareness.
Okay, let's dive into this and map out our clear, six-step journey through this unique cosmology. We'll be looking at 1. The world of goodness, 2. Awakening the soul's joy, 3. Light of the spiritual sun, 4. Telepathy and purified love, 5. Suffering as soul nourishment, and finally, 6. The moment of guidance.
Our exploration today is grounded specifically in Chapter 2 of the Eternal Law. This chapter meticulously outlines the nature of what the author calls the fifth dimension. Keep in mind, we are stepping into a very specific, carefully structured spiritual framework here, one designed by the author to map out life, consciousness, and evolution long after we leave the physical world behind.
All right, Section 1, the world of goodness.
To really grasp the author's vision, we first need to understand the actual topographical structure of this afterlife. The text presents this really fascinating spatial model using the metaphor of an onion. In this cosmology, the fifth dimension doesn't just sit rigidly above the fourth dimension, like steps on a ladder. Instead, it exists as an enveloping, onion-shaped space within and around it. The higher spiritual dimensions literally encompass the lower ones spatially. Because of this, inhabitants of the fifth dimension can freely travel back and forth to the fourth dimension, since they are completely enveloped by it.
So, who exactly gets to reside in this encompassing space? Well, the text refers to the fifth dimension as the world of goodness, or the spiritual realm. And together here, the source indicates souls have to meet some very specific intentional prerequisites. They must actively abandon evil, awaken to their inherent goodness, which the text explicitly describes as recognizing their nature as a child of Buddha, and consciously choose a higher spiritual path. It is a realm entirely defined by spiritual intention.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Awakening the soul's joy.
Once a soul successfully enters this new space, the text outlines a profound personal transformation. But to understand it, we first need to define what the author calls the astral body. According to the text, this is a subtle, physical-like body worn by souls down in the lower fourth dimension. You can think of it almost like a layer of clothing that mimics their former earthly existence, letting them retain human shapes and worldly habits.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core contrast between the two dimensions. You see, in the fourth dimension, souls are still clinging to this astral body and all their lingering earthly attachments. But upon ascending to the fifth dimension, they shed this astral body entirely. Without that physical-like limitation, the more subtle, true nature of the soul finally comes to the forefront. The text explains that up here, inhabitants find immense spiritual joy in self-expansion and improvement, specifically through helping others, bringing them joy, and acquiring vast new spiritual knowledge about the world created by Buddha.
Moving right along to Section 3, light of the spiritual sun.
Okay, so we've talked about the internal state of these souls, now let's look at their environment. Upon reaching the fifth dimension, inhabitants become acutely aware of the spiritual sun. Now, this isn't just a giant glowing orb in the sky giving off light. The text defines it as the ultimate source of pure, life-giving spiritual energy radiating directly from the Buddha. The souls residing here feel this deep inherent gratitude for the continuous blessings of its light because they recognize it as the very metaphysical energy that sustains their existence.
Next up, Section 4, telepathy and purified love. Now, what's really interesting about this is how these souls actually interact with one another. The text claims the entire concept of love completely shifts here. Because the souls have shed those physical-like barriers we talked about, their emotions become incredibly purified. This leads to a world of telepathic understanding. Feelings aren't hidden behind clumsy words or misunderstandings anymore. They are instantly, transparently, and directly conveyed from one soul to another. In this state of absolute pure transmission, there is literally zero room for hidden earthly motives. If you feel love, it is felt entirely and truthfully by the other person. The book describes this as learning true, unconditional compassion,
a love that is so pure it seeks absolutely no return. It represents a stark, almost night-and-day contrast to the conditional, highly transactional nature that so often plagues human relationships down on Earth.
Which brings us to Section 5, Suffering as Soul Nourishment.
Now this is where the text brilliantly bridges its grand heavenly cosmology right back to our earthly hardships. The source material makes a really profound claim here. It states that suffering is deliberately prepared by the Buddha as a whetstone and nourishment for the soul. And get this, the text notes that even up in these heavenly dimensions, sorrow and suffering still exist when things don't go one's way. It's not depicted as some realm of effortless, boring, static perfection. Actually, it's a dynamic space designed for continuous and sometimes very difficult spiritual evolution.
The author breaks down the mechanism of suffering almost like a psychological formula. It goes like this. You encounter a hardship, but instead of viewing it as mere misfortune or bad luck, you choose to use it as a whetstone to sharpen your spirit. This deliberate friction is what ultimately leads to a massive leap in soul progress. So suffering, in this view, isn't a punishment at all. It's a structural requirement for advancement.
And finally, Section 6, the moment of guidance. So, the crucial point is, what is the ultimate spiritual reward for all this intense evolutionary effort? Well, the author completely redefines our concept of status. According to the text, true nobility of the soul is never, ever found in living in a privileged, easy environment. Rather, true nobility is found entirely in the active, conscious overcoming of difficulties and handicaps. The struggle itself is what creates the value. So how do we actually achieve this nobility? The text lays out a very specific approach for us. We have to view our adversities not as unfair roadblocks, but as literal hints for solving life's deeper problems. By accepting our destiny and choosing to fight our battles with a true sense of purpose, we reach a critical threshold. And it is exactly at this point, when we adopt this proactive mindset, that the moment of guidance occurs. This unlocks immense power and support from higher spirits who actually recognize our effort. Which leaves us with a really powerful question to reflect on. How might viewing your own earthly challenges as hints for solving life's problems completely change your perspective today? Whether you view this text as literal spiritual truth or just a fascinating philosophical allegory, the idea of transforming our everyday struggles into a whetstone for personal evolution, well, it's incredibly empowering. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll catch you next time.